There's a lie we've been told for centuries. A lie so massive, so carefully constructed that most people still believe it today. The lie is this: Africa had no history before European colonization. No great kingdoms, no powerful rulers, no sophisticated civilizations. But here's the truth they tried to erase. Africa produced some of the most powerful, wealthy, and advanced empires in human history. Empires that conquered vast territories, created universities when Europe was in the Dark Ages, and accumulated wealth that would make modern billionaires look poor. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about 3 black rulers whose empires were so magnificent, so threatening to the colonial narrative, that historians deliberately erased them from textbooks. Hit that subscribe button, because this is history they never wanted you to know. Let's start with the richest human being who ever lived. Mansa Musa, the king whose gold crashed economies Mali, West Africa, 1312 AD, when Mansa Musa became emperor of the Mali Empire. He inherited something extraordinary: control over half of the world's gold supply. Let me repeat that: half of the world's gold. His empire stretched across 2,000 miles of West Africa, larger than Western Europe. It included major trade cities like Timbuktu, Gao, and Jen. The Mali Empire controlled gold mines, salt mines, and the trans-Saharan trade routes that connected Africa to the Mediterranean and the Middle East. But Mansa Musa wasn't just wealthy. He was educated, strategic, and deeply religious. In 1324, he decided to make the pilgrimage to Mecca, a journey of over 4,000 miles across the Sahara Desert and through the Middle East. This wasn't just a pilgrimage. This was the greatest display of wealth the medieval world had ever seen. Mansa Musa traveled with an entourage of 60,000 people. Think about that number: 60,000 soldiers, officials, merchants, and servants. He brought 12,000 enslaved people dressed in Persian silk. He had 80 camels, each carrying 300 pounds of pure gold. Do the math, that's 24,000 pounds of gold? In today's money, that's worth over $1.5 billion, and that was just what he carried for spending money. As Mansa Musa's caravan passed through cities like Cairo, Alexandria, and Medina, something unprecedented happened. He gave away so much gold to the poor, to officials, to merchants, that he literally crashed the economy. The sudden influx of gold devalued the currency so severely that it took 12 years for the region's economy to recover. One man's generosity caused a recession across 3 countries. Historians documented this. Arab scholars wrote about it. The Mediterranean world was stunned. Who was this African king whose casual spending could destabilize entire economies? When Mansa Musa reached Mecca, he impressed the Islamic world with his devotion, his knowledge of the Quran, and his diplomatic skills. He established trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and political alliances. On his return journey, Mansa Musa brought back scholars, architects, and poets. He commissioned the construction of mosques, libraries, and universities throughout his empire. Timbuktu became one of the greatest centers of learning in the world. The University of Sankara housed 25,000 students studying astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and Islamic law. Its library contained hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, many of which still exist today, proof of Africa's intellectual legacy. Mansa Musa's empire was so powerful that European mapmakers couldn't ignore it. On the 1375 Catalan Atlas, one of the most important medieval maps, Mansa Musa is depicted sitting on a throne, holding a golden scepter and a nugget of gold, with a crown on his head. The caption reads, "This Negro lord is called Musa Mali. So abundant is the gold in his country that he is the richest and most noble king in all the land." But here's what they do unteach in schools. When European colonizers arrived in Africa centuries later, they deliberately erased this history. They destroyed manuscripts, burned libraries, and rewrote the narrative to claim Africans had no civilization worth respecting. Mansa Musa's story was buried. Until recently, most people had never heard of the richest man in human history because he was black, and his existence contradicted the racist mythology that justified slavery and colonization. Now let's talk about a warrior queen who terrified the Romans. Queen Amynarinas, the one-eyed warrior who defeated Rome Nubia, Northeast Africa, 27 BC, when Caesar Augustus became the first Roman emperor, he inherited an empire that stretched from Britain to Egypt. Rome was the most powerful military force on earth. Its legions were considered invincible. But in the kingdom of Kush, located in what is now Sudan, there was a queen who refused to be intimidated. Her name was Amenarines, and she was about to do something no one else had ever done: force Rome to negotiate as equals. The kingdom of Kush was ancient, older than Rome itself. For centuries, Kushite rulers had controlled Upper Egypt, built massive pyramids, and developed a sophisticated culture. They had their own written language, Meroitic script, which scholars are still working to fully decipher. When Rome conquered Egypt in 30 BC, they assumed Kush would submit easily. They were wrong. Queen Amenarines was a Kandaka title for ruling queens in Kush. These weren't ceremonial positions. Kandaks were military commanders, political strategists, and absolute rulers. And Amenarines was the most formidable of them all. When Roman forces pushed south into Kushite territory, demanding tribute and allegiance, Amenarines responded with war. In 27 BC, she personally led an army of 30,000 soldiers into Roman-occupied Egypt. They attacked the city of Aswan, destroyed Roman statues, and captured several towns. According to Roman historians, Amenarines' forces even beheaded a bronze statue of Emperor Augustus and buried it beneath the steps of a temple, a symbolic act of utter contempt. Rome was shocked. How dare this African queen challenge the empire? Caesar Augustus sent Gaius Petronius, one of his best generals, with a massive army to crush the rebellion. The Romans pushed deep into Kushite territory, burning cities and taking prisoners. But Amenarines didn't retreat. She rallied her forces and fought back with tactical brilliance. She used guerrilla warfare, exploited the difficult desert terrain, and made the Roman occupation so costly that even Petronius knew they couldn't hold the territory. During one battle, Amenarines lost an eye, but she kept fighting. Imagine that. A one-eyed queen leading her army against the most powerful empire in the world, refusing to surrender. The war dragged on for 5 years. Rome couldn't decisively defeat Kush, and Kush couldn't permanently drive out Rome. Both sides were exhausted. So something extraordinary happened. Rome negotiated. In 21 BC, Queen Amenarines traveled to the Roman-held island of Samos to meet with Augustus's representatives. She negotiated a treaty as an equal, not a conquered subject, but a sovereign ruler. The treaty established fixed borders, mutual respect, and most importantly, Rome agreed to never demand tribute from Kosha. Amenarines had achieved what no other ruler had. She'd forced Rome to back down. Roman historians wrote about her with a mixture of respect and frustration. The Greek geographer Strabo described her as a very masculine sort of woman and blind in one eye. That's Roman code for, she kicked our asses, and we don't want to admit it. For the next 300 years, Kush and Rome maintained peaceful relations. The border held. Kush remained independent. But when European scholars rediscovered these ancient texts during the colonial era, they downplayed the story. They claimed Amenarines was a minor figure, that the conflict was insignificant, that Kush wasn't a real civilization. Why? Because acknowledging a powerful black African queen who defeated Rome would undermine the racist narrative they were building to justify colonization. Today, archaeologists have found the buried head of Augustus's statue, exactly where Amenarines' soldiers left it, physical proof of her victory. Now, let's travel to southern Africa and meet a king who built a city of stone. The Great Zimbabwe. The Empire Europeans refused to believe Africans built southern Africa. 11th–10th century AD, in the heart of modern-day Zimbabwe stand ruins so magnificent, so architecturally sophisticated, that when European colonizers first saw them in the 1800s, they refused to believe Africans built them. The ruins are called Great Zimbabwe, and they re the remains of a vast stone city that was once the capital of a powerful empire. Great Zimbabwe wasn't just a city. It was the center of a trading empire that stretched from the Indian Ocean to the interior of Africa. At its peak in the 14th century, it had a population of 18,000 people, making it larger than medieval London. The city's walls were constructed from over 1 million granite blocks, fitted together without mortar. Some walls are 36 feet tall and 20 feet thick. The engineering required to build this is staggering, especially considering it was done without written architectural plans or modern tools. The Great Enclosure, the largest single ancient structure in sub-Saharan Africa, has walls that curve and angle with mathematical precision. Inside the complex are towers, passageways, and platforms that suggest advanced knowledge of acoustics and astronomy. Archaeological evidence shows that Great Zimbabwe was incredibly wealthy. Excavations have found Chinese porcelain, Arabian glass, Persian pottery, and Indian beads, proof of extensive international trade networks. The kingdom controlled gold and ivory trade routes. They mined gold and traded it with Swahili merchants on the East African coast, who then sold it to Arabia, India, and China. Great Zimbabwe was part of a global economy centuries before Europeans discovered Africa. But here's where the erasure begins. When German explorer Karl Mach visited the ruins in 1871, he was stunned by their sophistication. But instead of crediting the Shona people, the ancestors of modern Zimbabweans, he claimed the ruins must have been built by Phoenicians or Arabs or even the biblical Queen of Sheba, anyone but black Africans. British colonizers who arrived later promoted the same lies. They needed to justify their occupation of the region, and acknowledging that Africans had built a great civilization would undermine their claim that they were bringing civilization to primitive people. The Rhodesian government, named after colonizer Cecil Rhodes, even hired archaeologists who were ordered to find evidence that Great Zimbabwe was built by non-Africans. When the archaeologists found proof that it was built by indigenous Shona people, the government suppressed the findings. Books were censored. Tour guides were instructed to tell tourists the ruins were mysterious and of unknown origin. Teachers were forbidden from telling students the truth. This wasn't accidental ignorance. This was deliberate historical erasure. It wasn't until the 1980s, after Zimbabwe gained independence, that the truth was officially recognized. Great Zimbabwe was built by the Shona people's ancestors. The Kingdom of Zimbabwe was a sophisticated African civilization. Today, the ruins are a UNESCO World Heritage Site. They appear on Zimbabwe's flag and currency. The nation is literally named after this empire reclaiming of identity that had been stolen. Why they erased these stories. So why did European colonizers work so hard to erase these empires from history? Because the existence of powerful, wealthy, sophisticated African civilizations destroyed the racist ideology that justified slavery and colonization. If Africans had built universities while Europe was in the Dark Ages, if African queens had defeated Roman legions, if African architects had constructed massive stone cities, then how could Europeans claim Africans were primitive savages who needed to be civilized? The answer, they couldn't, so they lied, they burned libraries, they destroyed manuscripts, they rewrote history. They trained generations of scholars to ignore or dismiss African achievements, and it worked. For centuries, millions of people believed Africa had no history worth studying. But the truth is unbreakable. Archaeological evidence doesn't lie. Ancient manuscripts survive. The ruins still stand. Mansa Musa's wealth is documented in multiple historical sources. Queen Amanirenas' war with Rome is recorded by Roman historians themselves. Great Zimbabwe stones still rise from the African earth, undeniable proof of African ingenuity. These three examples are just the beginning. There are dozens more. The Kingdom of Aksum in Ethiopia, which minted its own coins and built towering obelisks. The Songhai Empire, which had one of the largest armies in the world in the 5th–10th century. The Kingdom of Congo, whose capital city amazed Portuguese explorers with its organization and sophistication. The Ashanti Empire, whose golden stool symbolized a unity and governance structure that impressed even British colonizers. Every single one of these civilizations was downplayed, dismissed, or erased from mainstream history. But today, we're reclaiming these stories. Scholars are translating ancient manuscripts. Archaeologists are uncovering new sites. Historians are correcting the lies. And people like you are learning the truth. So remember this, Africa is not a continent without history. It is the birthplace of human civilization, the home of mighty empires and the origin of innovations that shaped the world. Mansa Musa proved that African wealth and generosity could humble the medieval world. Queen Amanarines proved that African military strength could stand against Rome itself. Great Zimbabwe proved that African architecture and engineering rivaled anything built in Europe or Asia. These rulers built empires. Empires they tried to erase, but were bringing them back. If this story opened your eyes, subscribe to this channel. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And drop a comment telling me which of these rulers inspired you most. Because this isn't just African history. This is human history, and it's time everyone knew the truth. See you in the next one.